Hello, everybody, and welcome to Nomadic Diaries. My name is Doreen Cumberford, the host, and with me today, I have the amazing Megan Norton-Newbanks. Say hi.
Hi.
I'm still getting used to that new name.
Yeah.
So we have a very special guest with us today. Our special guest is Dr. Helen Fagan. And we are speaking today on the subject of the Belonging Project. Now, Dr. Helen has lived in 3 countries, 5 US states. She has taught in 4 of the 7 continents. She is a CEO, she's an author, she is a podcast host, a nana, a mum, and a wife. Quite the variety of hats. And she was born and grew up partially in Iran. So thank you for joining us, Dr. Helen.
Thank you so much for having me, Doreen and Megan. I am excited to be here with you.
Oh, we are so thrilled. So I'll go with the first question. We're talking about, we call this Nomadic Diaries. And so I think there's a nomadic spirit that kind of gets lodged in many of us at birth. So you were the beneficiary of being born in a beautiful country called Iran. And of course, Iran had many history of lots and lots of nomads. And you also mentioned in your bio that you would prefer not to move again. So tell me about how that has shaped your worldview and how you've kind of arrived at where you currently are, Dr. Helen.
That's a really good question. So yes, my ancestors are Persian Bakhtiari, which is a nomads. And these would be my great grandparents. They would take their herd. They were sheep herders and goat herders, and they would take them from one part of Iran to the other part of Iran for grazing, during the different seasons. And so for that reason, that nomadic spirit is in me. And like you said in introducing me, I've moved a number of times. My nomadic spirit really shows up in whenever I travel somewhere, I want to explore and engage with the people and get away from the tourist things. I always want that. And so I feel like to be a nomad for me shows up not so much in moving from place to place in this season of my life, but in exploring the places that I find myself in and being curious.
I love that, Dr. Helen, and I tend to agree. For my own self, when I go to a new place, I like to explore just the other not so touristy areas. And I also wanted to ask you about your growing up years. Also, you moved a few times before coming to the US, and I was wondering, do you identify with the term third culture kid and an adult TCK?
Yeah. It's really interesting, Megan, because I did not become familiar with that term until probably about, I want to say 15 years ago. And I was a faculty member at University of Nebraska teaching and, doing research and stuff in my own research and working with populations. I came across the concept of TCK, and maybe it was longer than 15 years ago. The years run together. But anyways, all I know is I remember reading about it and going, wow, that makes so much sense. Yes, I haven't felt like I belong here or here and kind of questioned, where do I belong? How do I fit in? How do I, morph? And then, yeah, I've said goodbye to so many people that sometimes I get in this headspace of, I don't want to meet new people because I don't want to say goodbye again, because the goodbye is so hard. And, there's just so many things about TCK that I related to once I began to understand it and explore that concept, and have now used it to help individuals understand themselves better.
And I'm really curious about that. We're talking about the topic of belonging. And you just said that you identified with this sort of, it's almost like the impulsion of the heart, I find. It's like my heart becomes a train or a steam engine or a locomotive. And there's sort of this impulsion to relate to people, to connect to people who are other TCKs or long-term expats. Do you find that? And where do you think that impulsion comes from?
You know, it's really interesting. I think we want to connect. A couple of reasons. As human beings, we're wired for connection.
Yeah.
So there's this desire for that connection. And then when you've been in this space where you were the foreigner, where you were the one that didn't belong, you, at least for me, this is true. I work really hard to make others feel like they belong in my presence or in an environment that I am in, whether that's my classroom, that's a training I'm conducting, or in my home, or if I'm just out and I meet someone new and I see they don't seem to be connecting with anyone, they're standing, I'm the one that's going to want to go and engage with that person, just because there's this deep, I guess, connection within me of knowing what that feels like.
We're all nodding.
Yes, letting
Yeah.
that sit. And I love that. And I love the work that you do. I love the leadership trainings you do, the intercultural communication trainings you do. And in your book, you emphasize that doing the work of inclusion begins inside of us. So, can you walk us through what that internal work might look like for someone who is seeking to belong?
Yeah, I think often people don't find belonging externally because they haven't found it within. They have sought to figure out who they are, but they haven't really figured out who they are. And they're seeking external validation or verification of who they are, when internally they're confused about it. So for me, it's hard work. You know, it's really hard work, especially when you have had any type of trauma in your life, from whether it's a move, a divorce, whatever it was that has come about. And we don't get rewarded for that type of work in our society, in the American cultural society. That type of work doesn't seem to reap the go, get, be the number one kind of thing mentality. Yet it is absolutely the birthplace of belonging is inside. And the way that looks is a lot of reflecting, a lot of noticing the emotions. When do they show up? What do they show up as? What kinds of things am I wanting to avoid uncovering? What would be the joy or the benefit of that discovery? What do I need to let go of that no longer serves me? Sometimes it's a belief. I'll never forget before I moved to Nebraska, I worked in the corporate HR office of a company, and I reported to the vice president of HR. And I was lamenting to her about a situation that happened with my father. And she said to me, Helen, why don't you, when you move to Nebraska, you can either get a job or you can go back to school. You're a smart woman. Why don't you go back to school and continue your education? And until she said, you're a smart woman, the belief that I had was, I'm not smart enough to do anything. And I let those words sink into me. Her belief in me helped me to believe and look for something inside myself that I would not have had I not listened to the words and had she not uttered those words. And so when I say sometimes you got to let go of something that no longer serves you, it was that belief that I'm not smart enough. I needed to let go of that in order to pursue something that was important to me.
And so do you believe that belonging, I sometimes think of the flip side of belonging is making people and life welcome.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes I go after it like it's my job. And other times I don't. But do you feel like that is where the work begins at that deep, deep, deep analysis of our core values?
Yeah, and not just our core values, but those experiences that shaped our identity,
Mm.
that kind of shaped our belief system. Where did those things come from, and how did they shape us? And so it's a deep type of work, and it's a never ending work, because as you age and you have new experiences, me becoming a grandparent opened up a whole new level of understanding myself that didn't exist before when I was, a parent. And so I think with each season of life, there's new discoveries, there's new things you're uncovering about yourself. And so that deep work is ongoing. But to your question, I think it's a yin and a yang. I think we help others find belonging, but we also encourage them to find belonging within themselves. And just because I'm encouraging someone to find belonging in their own place does not mean I stop doing the work of removing barriers to belonging within the other place or other things that I see. So that's what I mean by the yin and the yang. So sometimes the work is internal, sometimes the work is external.
Thank you.
Yeah, I would agree. It's internal and external. And I want to ask you about an assessment that you facilitate, an inventory called the Intercultural Development Inventory, that is an external assessment, but speaks into our internal perspectives, our worldview. Could you explain a little bit about what this inventory is first, and then also how does it also relate to belonging?
Yeah. So I became exposed to the Intercultural Development Inventory when I was leading the cultural competence programs for a large hospital system in Nebraska, Bryan Health. And one of the members of our council had taken it as part of her graduate program. This was 2000, I believe, the year 2000. She had taken it as part of her master's degree, and she was really fascinated by it. And she said, Helen, I think you'd be interested in this. And so she shared a little bit about it with me. And then I said, oh, I'd love it for all of us on the council to take it. So it was myself as the leader of the council, and then 16 other people, 17 in total, that were all hospital team members, both clinical, non-clinical, different levels in the organization. And we took this assessment, and quite honestly, I was aghast at my results. I was like, there is no way that I scored where I scored, because I've lived in 3 countries, 5 states around the United States. I adapted to military culture. My husband's in the military. I've adapted to, corporate culture and learned the languages and all these different things that were going through my head. And so I began to explore and to understand this assessment, which led to me wanting to get trained in it. And that really helped me to understand not just myself better, but also other people better. And I feel like I've used it as a tool to help people gain self-awareness. It's a psychometric measure. It's highly valid and reliable. So, you know, as a researcher, we look for validity and reliability in any type of assessments that we do. So we look for any, if we're going to use an assessment, we want something that's highly valid and reliable. But even with that said, it's not 100% going to tell you everything about you, right? The number one question the assessment answers is, how does this person give meaning to cultural differences? And often people think of culture as, do they speak a different language? Do they eat different food? Do they celebrate different holidays? That's what we have culture. And, you know, it goes along a continuum. I liken it to, actually, I enjoy the newer idea around it is that it's more of a pendulum rather than a continuum of going from one end to the other. It's a pendulum, and it depends on where your focus is. If you focus a lot on how human beings are similar and how you're similar, and you engage with people who are similar, then your focus, you're either going to fall in what's called denial or minimization. If your focus is heavy on the differences, how you're different, how others are different, then you're going to fall either in the polarization at the far end or acceptance. And then in the middle is where we're anchored, is this adaptation. Individuals who've reached adaptation doesn't mean they know everything there is to know about every cultural group. What it means is that this person's brain automatically jumps to, they're different than me. This is who I am. This is what I know about myself. And this is what this person is. And we have to adapt our communication, our approach, our whatever. So that person's brain is constantly thinking there. Now, in the years that I've used this assessment, I would say probably well over 13,000 now we've assessed globally.
My goodness, that's a lot of people.
It is a lot of people. By and large, doesn't matter where, what level of education, what background, majority of people fall in this development level of minimization. And I think it's the conditioning that human beings are getting conditioned to. We're all human beings. We all want the same things. We should all treat each other with respect. That's the concept behind minimization. And when we are conditioned from a very young age to think about differences as don't even pay attention to it. You know, think about a child, little kid. I think about my my 3-year-old grandson going through the grocery store and seeing someone in a wheelchair going, oh, what is that? Why are they in the wheelchair? And if my reaction is, oh, don't say anything, don't say anything, I am conditioning him to think through minimization. Don't acknowledge the difference. And in the United States, we've done a lot of that. We've done quite a bit of that. And if you think about it, I've had this conversation with my Rwandan students multiple times. We don't teach people how to have conversation around politics or religion. We tell people avoid it.
Exactly.
Because of the volatility, because of the differences.
Yes.
So instead of teaching from a very young age how to have civil dialogue around things that are difficult, or saying to my grandson, that's a wheelchair. That helps this gentleman, woman, whoever the person is, be able to travel like we are when they don't have access to their legs. Instead of me taking the time to do that, which would be easy for them to understand, I would maybe minimize their question and say, hush, hush, don't say anything. That's not who I am, by the way. I'm the...
No. I can't imagine that.
Yeah.
I'm having a little bit of difficulty imagining you doing that.
Yeah. So this assessment, the thing that I like about it is it tells you where you think you are and where you actually are.
Yeah.
And what you want to do is to bring those two into alignment.
Yes. Yeah. Well, that's very helpful. I read a quote the other day. I'm not sure that I can remember that. It is, belonging is treated as if it's optional in the US. Someone said to me, and I thought, I didn't know I had a choice. I thought I was a member of the human race, and I already was belonging. And I try to find I'm not very sure that I'm good at belonging. I mean, I
Hmm.
can I can be a chameleon. I can show up in different environments. You know, I can listen to different languages. I can cross cultures. I have amazing adaptation skills. But that's the external part. And I think that each of us has a responsibility to also do all the internal work that you referred to earlier as being challenging.
Hmm.
And I don't know about you, but I always feel like I'm behind on my homework.
Doreen, that's really fascinating because I've always said I'm a late bloomer. In most everything in life, I'm a late bloomer. And it took me a long time to really just acknowledge that it's okay.
Yes.
It's okay to be a late bloomer. I'm not your typical early adopter of anything. While I like ideas and those new things, but I think part of it is that I got to let it sit with me for a little bit.
Yes. And I would agree with that. And the older I become, the more okay I am with that. Someone asked me a question on the pickleball court this morning, and it was a small logistical question. And I said, "Can I think about that?" And normally in the past, I would not, I would have felt very rushed to give an answer. And I think one of the messages of this belonging project is to encourage people in any decade to expand and adapt and push ourselves and live out that 4% outside of our comfort zone, right?
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah, it's really interesting. I've had this very conversation with middle school kids. Middle school kids are discovering identity. They're going through a phase of where they're discovering identity. And so they're seeking to find belonging with a certain group that is not family, not that familial connection, because that's where the belonging began, right? And so these middle school kids often will move out of, say, for example, they were part of a friend group that didn't have any distinct differences. There was just a group of kids. Then they go into middle school, and this group of 6, 7 kids, now one of them is part of the goth group, or one of them is part of the athletes group, one of them is part of the whatever group. But it's this separation, right? That has to happen. It's diverging from what I grew up. That has to happen in order for convergence to happen. And so it's okay for middle school kids to not feel like they belong. We got to help them to uncover what that looks like at that season, at that age, and that's a natural part of maturation.
Mm. I think that's true for elderly people too, because many of us find ourselves feeling like we're back in middle school, um, especially living in an expatriate community here in Mexico, and many of these people they're conducting an experiment outside of their normal thought processes and learning how to belong in the midst of sometimes cultural dissonance and conflict.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
I did a TED talk in 2012. I was about 3 years into my PhD program, and it was called Diagnosed with PTSD and MDD, which is major depressive disorder, and managing to get a PhD. And part of my therapeutic interventions, I worked with a trauma psychologist that was a dear friend who ran a trauma center for refugees in our town. And I knew her from my work at the hospital and stuff. And when nothing physical was making sense, because the diagnosis came about 4 months after I had ended up in the emergency room, There was no, they thought I had all these different physical diseases and nothing was making sense. I finally called her up and said, hey, can I just come talk to you? I'm not,
Mm-hmm.
but one of the things I learned from her was cognitive dissonance.
Mm-hmm.
And who I see myself on the inside is very different than what I'm experiencing on the outside. And there's not a, and so for me to learn to manage the depressive disorder and the trauma, for me to learn to manage that, there's multiple things that have to happen. I take my medication, I see my therapist, I exercise, I eat good, I sleep, I journal, I walk, all these things that I do.
You do the homework.
Yeah, I do a whole bunch of stuff, right?
Yes.
I do the homework. But that dissonance piece was new to me when she first mentioned it. And I was diagnosed with it in 2007. And it came as a total shock to me, but it was all rooted in the trauma I experienced shortly after arriving and the hostage crisis happening and being away from family and in a boarding school and all this stuff. And there was a lot of stuff there. But my brain had always been, hey, this is making me smarter, stronger, wiser. The song by Gloria Gaynor, I Will Survive. It was kind of like that which doesn't kill me makes me stronger. That was kind of like my mantra. But there was this deep pain inside, right? In my head, I got it. In my heart, I was broken. But the two weren't lining up. And so that concept of dissonance, and I had to do the work for the dissonance to create understanding and meaning from that. So.
The journey of belonging, eh, Megan?
I think you're speaking into a lot of relief that can come with knowing we're not alone and feeling the pain, the hurt, and also the wisdom that comes with professionals who can give us the language of what might be going on, what might we not be thinking of that's contributing to our feeling not at peace or whole. And so I appreciate you bringing that up and being vulnerable and sharing your story, because I feel relief too in hearing it, and that the discomfort, while painful and something we want to run away from, sometimes we have to run into and know that it doesn't have to be overwhelming for a long period of time, but for a period. And I'm wondering, how now do you perhaps speak into communities that you work with and saying that it's this both and, this paradoxical experience of discomfort and also joy in how we experience belonging?
Yeah. Megan, a while back when you and I talked, you mentioned when you're a TCK, you have lived this larger than life experience, right? And people always want to hear it because it's just so big. It's just so wow. And we have to be willing to, I think the way that you said it is, and I'm trying to remember exactly how you said it, was that we have to listen as deeply as we want to be heard, I think is what you said.
Yes, and that's wisdom from Brené Brown.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Mic drop.
Yeah. So for me, that, giving people space to share their stories when we're in a community, giving people space to share their stories, and those who don't feel like they have a story, because sometimes I think people, when we individuals like the three of us share our story, people are like, whoa, what? I've lived in the same town my whole life. I don't have a story. And so then it becomes it becomes, kind of like I shared my whole heart with you.
Mm.
While I recognize your journey hasn't been anything like mine, but if you just tell me a little bit about what your journey has been like, I bet there is something in there that is your story. And so, for those of us who have had those experiences, I think part of it is just listening as deeply as we want to be heard.
Mm.
And then sometimes it's about us just, not sharing our story until we hear other people's stories.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. And I would also add that sometimes it requires me asking myself, so am I creating a greater sense of connection by diving into the story, or am I building walls?
Yeah.
Because our stories can do both.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that um, it's quite a delicate balance to be very judicious about is this a good time? And we all know people who've come back from overseas, and some of those memories are so palpable and so real that we can't stop telling and sharing them. But because there's no, but we don't always take the time to have that shared moment to realize that we're trying to build connection and not tear it down.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah. I like to say also be interested and interesting.
Yes.
I used to say, be interested, not interesting, but then that minimizes the story. And
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
it's the both and be
Yeah.
interested and interesting.
And yes, definitely.
That was the phrase that I think you said that I was searching earlier, Megan. Be interested and interesting. And I think that curious, asking questions. And to your point, Doreen, this is where I think emotional intelligence plays a role, because you have to have the ability to know self-awareness, and then, to know when you need to pause, self-management, when you need to read the impact you're having on others. And is that what we intend? Is my communication building a wall, or is it building a bridge? What was my intent in that? And so, yeah, being interested is very key to that, but definitely emotional intelligence. This is why I use emotional intelligence. So the work that we do with leaders is, I say our approach lies at the intersection of neuroscience, how the brain is wired to work, emotional intelligence, intercultural mindset, and leadership theory. So
Mm.
with a PhD in human sciences and studying leadership, and from early on, I'm talking back 6,000 years ago to present day, to really thinking about all of that and helping leaders to lead in a way that bridges, that leverages the differences of their team, that gives space for people to be their real selves. And often I think leaders struggle with this because they're like, they want humans to behave like robots, and
Mm.
humans do not. They take energy and time and focus.
So I have a question about that. You said neuroscience, emotional intelligence, intercultural mindset, and leadership theory. Um, don't you think that this is really, I would like to hope, well, I'd like to dream that the purpose of Nomadic Diaries is actually to translate this for the regular person who is looking to lead themselves.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And,
Absolutely.
and what should we be doing to further that mission?
Yeah. one of the things that I have found is, in Dr. Keegan and Dr. Leahy in their book, Immunity to Change, talk about this, where people may want change, but they're not necessarily willing to do the work to change. And what I mean by want change is they may want to grow, but they are not willing to put in the effort. And we think, oh, okay, I sat down and I journaled one time, or I talked to someone who's different than me one time, or I did something one time or two times or three times. Why isn't it getting better? Why am I not whatever? It's this idea that this work of, whether it's self-discovery, finding belonging, helping others, that it's a one-time thing, or it's a short-term thing. It's a part of the human journey, and it's an ongoing.
Yes.
It's ongoing. And honestly, I don't know that people want to expend the energy to something that is ongoing. They say they want to, but they don't really want to. And I often have to take it down to the very, very personal level, for the leaders. These leaders, sometimes they're a book club leader. I'm not talking just a CEO of a company. I'm talking someone who genuinely just wants to be able to engage in conversations with people when they're reading a book and it's different than what they believe,
Yes.
or what. And when we say the work, you have to be willing to do the ongoing work. That's when it's hard for people. But for me, it's what would make me want to do this work on an ongoing basis?
Ask yourself the right question. Yeah. Yes.
Yeah, you have to ask yourself that question. What, or in many cases, it's who. And being a grandparent, again, being a nana, for me, when and one of the questions I've asked, and I've written it down, whose face do you see when you think of love?
Oh.
Whose face comes up for you when you think of someone you love? And is that person worth it? If you can't do it for yourself, is that person worth it to do it for? And basically what we're doing is we're calling humanity to want to do the work.
Yeah.
Yeah. You're really speaking into more of a collectivism, right? Community. How does community mirror then and show up to us, who we want to be and how we can be? I love that, because sometimes in US American contexts, it's very individualistic, and it's pull your boots up by the bootstraps, and you are the Lone Ranger. And so I think you live out well what you share with others, and that you surround yourself with people who speak into your own journey of being light and love, and very inspirational. Thank you.
You bet. Yeah, I appreciate the opportunity to getting to chat with you about this. I think we could go on for hours.
Apparently we could.
Because I think it's such it's a heart conversation, right?
It is.
It's about connecting. It's about being understood. It's about helping others understand. And it's, each of us in our own way has done that work with other people. And so that's why we're passionate about it.
Yes. As we start to sort of wrap this up, I have a little left turn that I would like to ask you about, and that is just how are you managing the idea of belonging in terms of your nationality of origin, Iran? And I think you told me you have relatives still in Iran today.
Mm-hmm.
Can
Mm-hmm.
you just speak to a little bit about that so we can just close on this idea of just sending sending really humanity a lot of love, because I believe that the more global hearted we are and the more we talk about these issues as if these are real people, I think it really helps us connect when we get a sense that, oh, I heard somebody who has a relative there. It makes all of us feel connected.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, my mother lives in Iran. So does my younger brother, who trained as an orthopedic surgeon in the US and went back to Iran. Um, and lots of aunts, uncles, um, they all live in Iran. And so, as you can imagine, it was a harrowing couple of weeks of trying to connect with loved ones, make sure everyone was safe. And they live in Tehran. I should emphasize that they
Okay.
live in Tehran, which is
Yes.
where the bombings originally occurred. And so I immediately wanted to know if everybody was okay. Um, the two times I was able to get in contact with my mother and my brother, they were okay. And then there was this gap of like 10 days where I couldn't reach anyone. And I have an uncle, my mom's youngest brother lives in England, and he was trying to communicate. And in a roundabout way, about I think it was day 6 or day 7, we got through to someone where we could say, yes, they are alive, they are well, they're okay. But it's in the unknowing, it's in the not knowing, that immediately knowing what I know about neuroscience in the brain is that immediately you go into this fight or flight. And knowing this, my own trauma and from the past, you go into this again. It's your tendency. Uh,
Yes.
so for me, I had to do everything that I was teaching other people to do.
Mm.
I had to do the journaling. I had to do the breath work. I had to do the walking in nature. I had to take myself away from anything that would get my brain going. Because I know if I get too much into the future, the what if, the future is anxiety. Anything too much in the past, of rumination of the I wish I had, or whatever, is the depression, right? So I had to be in the present moment. And the one thing that I've learned that really helps me stay in the present moment is being around my grandkids, because you cannot be anywhere else. When you're with 3, 4, 7, that those
Yeah.
ages, you just got to be right there.
Right.
So for me, it took literally every day, every moment of just being intentional and trusting. A friend asked me about it, and I said, I have this thing for every birthday. I like to do something I've not done before. And last year I turned 60, and for my 60th birthday, I jumped out of an airplane.
Very good.
She had done it before. She did. It's a tandem jump. You jump with, you're strapped to an instructor, right? And I was trying to describe, I said, it feels a lot like when I jumped out of the airplane. The air was coming so fast, I couldn't suck the breath in. My mouth was dry. My skin was tight because the air is coming so fast. It's like, and you just have to let go and surrender to the gravity that is pulling you down, and trust the parachute that's on the back of this person and the person that you're strapped to, that it's going to work. So you have to trust to the creator, the unknown, I have no control, and it just so happened my mom's birthday was on the 22nd of June. We couldn't get a hold of her, and it was her 80th birthday. And so
Oh,
here's what we're going to do. I'm going to cook Iranian spaghetti the way she taught me. The kids are going to come over, grandkids are going to come over. We're going to buy her a cake. We're going to sing her happy birthday. We'll video it and we'll send it to her when her
and you can.
computer is working again, and we can connect, and she'll have something. And my sister, who lives in New York, she did the same thing with her kiddos. And so that was just kind of like us, deciding this is how we're going to do it. And so that's how I went through those days. And for me, I'm thinking of the Palestinians and the Ukrainians and the Sudanese and all the people all the places in the world that there's whether it's war, famine, hunger, whatever's going on, that, so you could dive into being over empathy, being like that freezing you. So, but I had to recalibrate and do it that way.
Well, this is very helpful because this really, I think, is a very concrete, a very congruent, a very present example of building belonging and building a sense of belonging. So thank you so much for sharing that. I don't have any more questions for now, but I would just say on my part, my favorite quote currently is true belonging doesn't require you to change who you are. It requires you to be who you are. And so I want to thank you so much for participating. And I'll leave it to Megan to close out for today. Is that okay?
Well, thank you, Dr. Helen, and I cannot wait to meet up again in person here in Nebraska. You are an incredible, wise woman, and thank you for sharing a lot of your wisdom with us here today.
Likewise, I look forward to it, Megan, and I got to throw out a thank you to our friend Tatiana who connected us.
I know Tatiana.
Yes.
Yes, thank you, Tatiana.
So thank you for having me on your podcast, and I look forward to enjoying some tea or something with you very soon. And Doreen, if you're ever in Nebraska, please look us up. We'd love to host you. And if I'm ever in
San Miguel, likewise, mi casa, tu casa.
Likewise. Have a great rest of your day.
Thank you so much. Sayonara, masalama, and hasta luego from Nomadic Diaries.